All right. Well, thank you all so much for joining us. Today, we're going to discuss tips and tricks to build the perfect resume. So we have four presenters today, including Nicole Caceres, Owen Pierce, Andrea Russell, and myself, Margot Hosfield. Nicole is the lead front-end web development instructor for Code Talk. And Code Talk is a nonprofit that teaches women from underserved communities. She's also one of the founders of Long Beach Women in Tech, which is a group that is offering professional workshops every Saturday during this pandemic. Owen is a senior iOS developer at Walmart Labs. He's 10 years of programming experience and loves to share his knowledge of software development. Owen's past projects include the official Disneyland iOS app and the Best Buy app. Andrea is a talent acquisition business partner with experience in high-paced tech startups to global Fortune 500 companies. She brings experience defining strategy, direction, and execution of the recruiting and sourcing process. Now, as for me, I'm a senior cybersecurity recruiter at Staunton May. I'm also the founder of Grow It, Growing Women in Technology, which is a community that focuses in on issues that are impacting the career development of women in tech today. I also sit on the board for WiCyS SoCal affiliate, and WiCyS SoCal is part of the WiCyS National nonprofit, and that's serving the Southern California region. We provide a community of engagement, encouragement, and support for women, non-binary individuals, and allies who are currently working in cybersecurity or interested in the field to network and support each other. Now, Nicole, would you like to go ahead and kick us off?
Yes, thank you. So let me see, can you change the slide, Owen? So, like was said, I'm the lead front-end web development instructor for Code Talk. We currently have alumni who are working in The Honest Company, Sony, Munchkin, and Uber. I work with a lot of people who are recent college graduates and career changers. I'm also the founder of the Long Beach Women in Tech. We're a group that have been around for 3 years now. So if you're interested in any of our webinars, we are hosting every Saturday. I am also a career changer. 3-4 years ago, I was a fine artist, and I decided that I wanted to start working into tech. And so I understand how many of you women feel and individuals. Next slide. So what I'm going to focus on are tips for recent graduates, tips for career changers, how to match your experience to the job description, and speak the company's and recruiters' language. Next slide, please. So recent graduates, I often hear from graduates that to get a job, I need experience, and to get experience, I need a job. And I can definitely understand and relate to that. One thing that a lot of colleges and boot camps don't focus on is actually communicating your projects to your actual resume. So you do have experience, you do have those skills. That's why you go to a boot camp and a university. So learning, really beefing up your education section and learning what skills to put on and what even classes to focus on. So when I was moving from a degree in fine art into tech, my education was still relevant. I just focused on the graphic design courses I took. I said bachelor's in studio art, courses included typography, graphic design, 2D design, 3D design. So if you have coursework that is relevant to that position, still put it on. And then list and describe your personal and your class projects. So below is an example of something from my old resume. When I was a recent graduate, more than 50% of my resume was projects. And within that project, I described exactly what I did. So I put a PSD to HTML. I put that it was a website for a jewelry store, and I listed the technology I used to create that website. For example, Bootstrap, Flexbox, Font Awesome, Google Fonts. And with that, I was able to get a lot of interviews, and we really focused on my projects. So employers and recruiters do care about projects because what they care about is that you can do what you say you can do. Next slide, please. So career changer tips. So you might have a lot of years experience. Look for those transferable skills. Use those job postings, the jobs that you really want to get involved with, print them out and start highlighting the skills that you already do have. So you can start translating it to your resume. Every job has transferable skills, even if you're a barista. Think about all the people that you have to communicate, you have to organize, and you have to multitask. Put those down. I would also consider moving into a position in tech in a field that you're already familiar with. So if you have X number of years in healthcare, look for a tech position in that field. You can leverage your knowledge in that industry to move into a different position. So for example, I had a lot of experience with working with fine artists and graphic designers. So when I was going to interviews with creative agencies, I really laid it out. I'm like, I know your language. I know our clients' language. I know how to communicate with them, and I know their concerns. And I leveraged their business needs with how I was equipped to help them and understand their needs. So next slide. So when you start writing out your resume, I want you to look at the responsibilities and duties of that position. Look for any crossover that you have in your current or past positions, or even group projects that you had in your boot camp or your university. So, for example, if you don't have that, make it. One of my students, she worked with lawyers as a secretary, and she let them know, hey, I'm involved in this boot camp. If you need any help on your website or on the tech side, please give those responsibilities to me and I'll handle it. So even though she had the position of secretary, she started gaining those duties and responsibilities in her current role, and she leveraged that into a new tech position at a different company. So the point is, even if your company is not willing to give you those responsibilities, you don't have to wait for permission for someone to give you experience. Create those opportunities for yourself. So volunteer. You can participate with WiCyS, Anita B, Long Beach Women in Tech. All of these tech groups are open to volunteers and have open positions. Engage with them to get more experience. Join another tech group or even start a tech group. I know one of the reasons why I founded the Long Beach Women in Tech was all the tech groups were 2 hours away from me. It was not feasible for me to engage with those groups because they were so far away. And I wanted more face-to-face relationships. Also, build a project for a friend. You might have friends with their own businesses. Ask them if you can charge them maybe a small amount and some experience. And that really helped me in the beginning. I'm like, look, I know you're an artist. I know you need a portfolio. Let me build it for you and be my reference for the next job. And I was really happy that most of them were willing to pay me. Also, contribute to open source. Open source is so much more than just coding. Open source projects need UX developers, they need UI developers, they need people in cybersecurity. It takes so much skill to maintain an open source project, to look into how you can participate into those things, to put experience on your resume. Don't wait for experience to come knocking on your door. Next slide. Speak their language. So recruiters and the people who work in these companies, they're people. And before you can start asking for things like jobs, you need to understand them and their needs. Seek to understand them before you ask them to understand you. So one thing I always do, I print out all the positions. I mostly do this for my students now. We'll print them all out and we start getting a highlighter and highlighting all the keywords that these companies are doing. So not even the job, just the job postings, but actually the websites of the companies. Start figuring out what their values are, what their business needs are. Do your research. Try to understand them so you can speak to them. This is a conversation. And then start highlighting where you would be a good fit for them and start putting that into your resume. And use the exact terms they're using, especially in tech. So there's a lot of jargon in tech and a lot of words mean the same thing. And sometimes recruiters do not know what these technologies are. They just have a list of skills they're looking for. And if you have that skill, but you're using a different term, you might miss out on that opportunity. So if in the position they're looking for version control and you put GitHub, that's the same thing. But use the term they're using. Don't use the term that you would normally use. And remember that people and computers skim, they don't read. If you have to go through hundreds of resumes, you're not going to spend a lot of time on each one. So having that language and those keywords helps the recruiter and even, any AI that the computer's using to know that you're someone that they should probably take a little bit longer to look at and stand out a little bit more. Next slide, please. So is there any questions?
Nicole, it's Andrea. There actually was a question that came through the chat. Where do you find open source opportunities?
That's a great question. So there are some really popular ones on GitHub, but I would really go to tech groups and tech meetups because there are a lot of smaller projects that need more opportunities and less people participating in it. And also in tech conferences. I've met a lot of developers who are working on their side project who are like, oh, I really want to build this out, but I don't have enough help and support. Most open source projects, only one person is maintaining it. So find a project that you're excited about. So I would say mostly in person, but if you're a person who likes to engage more online, Twitter would also be a great place to look.
And many open source projects need designers as well.
Yeah.
So it's not just programmers, they need help on all fronts.
And even marketing. A lot of open source projects need marketing. So if there's any part you can engage with, seek it out. Any other questions? So if you think of something else, please shoot me a message on LinkedIn. That is where I'm most accessible and most likely to engage with you. Okay, I would like to introduce Owen. He's going to focus more on how to actually talk about your projects in great detail. Would you like me to share, Owen, or do you have it?
I think I've got it here.
Okay.
So, hi everyone. My name is Owen Pierce. I'm a senior software engineer at Walmart Labs working on their iOS projects. I have 10 years of programming experience where I've worked at Walmart, Disney, Best Buy, and even some startups. So there's my LinkedIn, email, and Twitter if anybody wants to get in touch. So I'm going to talk a little bit about how we talk about your experience. So you want to focus on accomplishments, and especially quantifiable accomplishments. They're very attention-grabbing. So if you can say, I improved the launch time by 20%, or reduced the size of an app by 30%, or I implemented NIST standard XYZ, those are things that people want to hear about. You want to use strong verbs, something like created, built, implemented, stuff like that. You want to take direct personal ownership of things on your resume. It's not something that my team did this or we did this, unless you're looking for a role in management. But generally speaking, you want to be talking about something that I personally did. Because if you're saying we did something, was it your individual contribution? Or was it someone else on your team? Should we be interviewing that person instead? So now, things that you want to include, always read the posted job description. They're going to give you the buzzwords that you got to put in your resume. And your bullet points should support your skills section. So if the job is looking for skills in Python, then make sure you've got a bullet point about some Python skills that you've used. You want to include hard and soft skills. So I want to talk a little bit about how I coded up a server with Python. And I'm probably also going to want to talk about how I interfaced with product managers and designers and other stakeholders in the project so that I can see that I'm a holistic person. I'm able to do all parts of the job. Project context can be helpful. You want to keep it short. So Disneyland kind of speaks for itself. The part where I'm talking about Best Buy on my resume, I might go into a little bit more detail saying that I was focused on the retail shopping experience. But again, that's going to be part of the conversation that you have in the interview. So you want to think about times where you showed leadership, technical knowledge, effective communication, and problem-solving ability. So those are stories that you want to tell through your resume that will help you show that you are a knowledgeable and competent person in technology. So this all feels a lot like bragging to me. I have a lot of trouble with writer's block whenever I'm doing this. So the best way to overcome writer's block is take notes about the projects. Write up a description of the project that you worked on and what exactly you did on that project. If you have a job, keep a copy of the job description around. You're not necessarily going to copy it verbatim into your resume, but it's something where you can say, yeah, jobs that look like this, I got hired for that once, I can get hired for it again. Now, if you're low on experience, or if you've been at one company for a long time, you might consider organizing by project instead of by company. So that way that you're calling out specific things that you accomplished at one company. So if you're a student or you've only had one job in tech, breaking out projects that you've had at a company into their own kind of subsections can make sense. Additionally, volunteer experience is experience. So that includes things like helping out family members, family businesses, if you have done anything involving nonprofits in your region or something like that, that's absolutely something to list on your resume. But you want to make sure that it remains relevant to your technical expertise. So if you have no professional experience, look at your relevant coursework and talk about projects that you had in those classes. Talk about your volunteer experience. If you have a side project on GitHub, that's absolutely something you can talk about. Obviously, the more complete, the better, but you want to show your skills. Were you involved with any research papers? Do you have any certifications? Because the big question that you're trying to answer here is, how do you know what you know? So this is something that you want every bullet point in your resume to point back to some skill that shows that you are knowledgeable about what you claim you know. So when it comes to editing your resume, you always want to ask a trusted friend for a detailed review. This is just because it's really hard to brag about yourself, and your friends will be able to help you figure out whether or not what you're saying makes sense outside of your context. This isn't something where you want somebody to just take a quick glance. This is a detailed review. It can take upwards of an hour, where you're going to go through every bullet point, and it's going to feel a little bit like kind of a mock interview, because you want to have that conversation with your friend and explain each part of your resume so that it's clear what you're doing. You want to write like a newspaper headline. You want to be punchy and grabbing, attention grabbing. For each job or project subsection, you want to have 3 to 5 bullet points max. You're looking to start a conversation about your role. You're not looking to start a novel. And you want to describe your role. So your job title should be on there, but oftentimes, if you're at a company, your job responsibilities and your accomplishments are going to vary. So yeah, I may have been a software engineer at one company, but I sure did a lot of project management as well. Or at another company, I was more involved with visual design, so I can talk a lot about my interactions with designers and the more front-end part of my job. In fact, at one company, we even had a security audit, which was absolutely something that was relevant. So in terms of keeping track, so obviously we do a lot with our time. I use Google Docs to track my resume. Your mileage may vary. I suggest writing down all accomplishments and just keep them in a CV or curriculum vitae. That's from academia. It can go long. I really hope yours does, because this is everything that you've done in your career. Now, the idea here is that you're not going to show this to every recruiter who asks. The idea here is you're going to edit your CV down to a resume for when you're applying to a job. And you want to keep a folder with dated and company named resumes so that you can say, yes, I applied to Google on April 1st, 2019, or something like that. You can see what resume you submitted, and you can talk intelligently about that, and just remember what you did at that time. So having been on the other side of the interview table, I have had numerous interviews where I'm walking to go interview somebody, and HR puts their resume in my hands as I'm walking to the interview room. I'm only going to see your resume for a few minutes or seconds possibly before. So you want your resume to have bullet points that are great hooks for conversation. So think about the places where you can have that conversation and expand on those bullet points for the interview. Think about how you're going to connect the dots for your interviewer. So if you're trying to expand into a new role, you want to be talking about what you've done in previous roles that might make you uniquely qualified for this new job. And remember, interviews are a two-way conversation. So this is something where you can use this as an opportunity to learn more about the company culture, what they value, and how they do their work. So you want to make sure that you're talking to a company that understands that and gives you information back in an interview. Otherwise, it can be a lot more difficult to understand what it is you're going to be getting yourself into. So with that, I'll open up to questions. If anybody wants to ask anything here.
Yes, we have a few in chat. We have, let's see. How would I add volunteer under employment? Can you give examples?
Yeah, so I have a couple of organizations that I'm actively involved with. If I am just a volunteer at that group, it depends on the level of involvement. If I am doing a ton of work for them, if I'm building out an entire website for an organization, I would even give it equal billing to another job, to be honest, because that is really what it is. You are taking on a full-time project in a way. If my involvement is a little bit less involved, then I would probably use it as kind of a subheader, so have volunteer experience, where I just say I worked as a programmer or as a web designer or whatever that may be for this organization. But that's what I would do if I had a thicker resume to fall back on.
Oh, and it's Andrea. In the chat box, there is a question about the CV and how do you take your CV and kind of condense it down into a 1 to 2 page resume?
So the CV is basically, for me, it's notes. I'm not saying that I'm going to be applying for any academia positions. You could with it, but basically, the way that I do that is it's a way for me to have a record of everything that I've done so that when it comes time to write up my resume, I don't have to do it from scratch every time. This is a way for me to keep track of all the things that I've written about and accomplished so that I don't have to rewrite every single bullet point every time.
Okay, we have a few more questions. Where would you add your project experience on your resume?
So for my resume, I typically give a billing for the company that I worked at. I include whatever my job title was. And then at some point, I give a length of how long I was there, so a duration for the job. And then I'll give a project title. So for example, at my first job, I was there for quite a long time. And so most of my professional experience was at that job. Now, while I was there, I had probably 6 different projects, but I chose to pick out the 2 biggest ones where I had the biggest responsibilities, and I broke them out into subsections because those were the ones where I could have the best conversation. So it was something where I probably exceeded the number of bullet points that I'd want to give for one job if I had more to talk about. But realistically speaking, it was relevant for me to have multiple bullet points about each of these major projects because they were major projects. They were major initiatives where I had large responsibilities. So that was a pretty good opportunity to expand on an individual job where I had a lot of different projects.
One thing I would like to add is I mentioned that the majority of my resume outside of college was projects. So I had a separate project section right underneath education. So it was just its own highlight. Like I had education at the top, and then underneath that, the majority of my resume was just projects because it wasn't tied to a company.
Yep, and that's completely legitimate. I've interviewed several people who are self-taught who had some pretty stellar projects, to be honest. So if it's something where this is a project that has not yet been released, then providing a link to the GitHub, if it's visible, is definitely relevant, or just a link to more information about it, if you can. So we're going to take a few more minutes for questions here, and then we're going to take a little bit of a break. So I figure we'll do probably another 10 minutes for questions, and we'll take a 10-minute break here. So.
And Owen, it's Andrea again. We have another question from Lori Polanski. Lori, we're going to hold off on your question, if that's okay, until Margot does her presentation. Margot may actually cover that.
Yep, so I've got 10 years experience. I can't speak to more senior people. Thankfully, we have some excellent recruiters here who are able to speak to that at greater length. So Tracy, I see you're asking about industry conference attendance on your resume. So that's a good question. It's something where if you're early on in your career, listing that as an additional section can make some sense. But it is something where that doesn't necessarily directly speak to what you know. So it's something that kind of establishes that you're interested and that you're engaged and involved. But you want to make sure that that you have more detailed information about what you know and what you've accomplished. So I wouldn't necessarily put that in with the same billing as like a project or a job, but putting it alongside or near an education section can make sense.
And we have another question from Tracy related to languages study and security clearance. So Tracy, with languages studied, you would only put languages on your resume if you are somehow fluent. So if you can read and write Spanish or read and write French, you absolutely should put that. If you just studied Spanish in college and you don't read or write, I would omit that from your resume. And for your second question, being a US citizen, that one's tricky. I have seen it both ways. I have seen a lot of people from other countries that do actually include if they are a US citizen, just to avoid being rejected out of a pipeline. However, if you're already a US citizen and it's obvious by your name, I don't think you need to include that unless you do have some sort of government clearance.
Yeah, definitely listing government clearance is definitely worth your time because it takes a lot to get clearance. I see a question from Amin Lanish. Sorry if I butchered that. You're asking, how do you show freelance or contract positions? So for that sort of thing, if you do a lot of contracting, doing like a couple contracts and then applying for something bigger, that's relatively easy to write out. You can write out the company that you contracted for, the project that you were on, and then what you accomplished during that contract. If you are largely freelance, then I would say kind of wrap your projects and contracts into a single heading, and that way you can cover more of the what you accomplished with a given project, but you don't necessarily need to spell out that, oh, I had 20 different freelance projects. At that point, you're probably better served by breaking it out into its own company, saying Amin Lanish contracting or something like that, or freelance work. And then you can talk a little bit about some of the bigger projects, but not necessarily every single thing, because a lot of freelance stuff you can have a lot of different projects, so giving each one full billing can be a little bit distracting. So, all right. So I see a lot of other questions here that are going to be talking a little bit about the length of your resume and changing careers. I'm going to defer that to some of our recruiters. And we're going to take about 10 minutes here so that everybody can get up, stretch their legs, go to the bathroom, get some water, and we'll be back at 1:50. All right. Welcome back, everybody. Thanks for coming back to join us. So our next speaker is going to be Margot Hosefield, and I will get the slides ready right here.
Thank you, Owen. So once those slides are up, I'm going to take us through important elements to include and implement when you're structuring your resume. So first, it's key to understand, sorry, next slide. It's key to understand attention span. So across all fields, hiring managers and recruiters, we get hundreds of submissions for each job that we post. So due to volume, we often skim resumes. So if your resume is a block of text, your application will likely be passed over without managers ever reading it. So what you can do to avoid a situation like this is breaking up your resume into categories. That includes education, certifications, work history, and skills. So you should also create a bulleted list to neatly summarize key information. Lists and categories make resumes more visually appealing and super easy to read for those who are reviewing it. Second, you want to make sure that you're limiting the length of your resume. So hiring managers have limited amount of time devoted to reading resumes. So try to limit your resume to 1 or 2 pages. Now, I know there's a lot of controversy with that. Sometimes it's preference, sometimes it can make a huge difference. So if you can't limit it to 1 or 2 pages, I have a maximum 4-page, I think I'll still read a resume after 4 pages, but I really do like to see a 1 or 2 pages in that. You should also use your resume to highlight your biggest achievements, but be sure to remove any work experience from college or high school, unless it's volunteer experience that we talked about earlier. Also remove any experience that's not directly related to the job that you're applying for. Next slide, please. You also want to make sure that you're highlighting your accomplishments, not your tasks. So most resumes I get read like a list of tasks, such as I updated company software, or I used problem-solving skills to troubleshoot. While this does paint a really great picture of what you're doing every single day, it doesn't set you apart from the competition by highlighting what you uniquely brought to the job. So instead, you can focus on accomplishments and mention them as specifically as possible. For example, if you created a program that simplified processes or saved employees time, That's important to mention. Any instance where you delivered results ahead of deadline, under budget, exceed expectations, that is worth highlighting. Whenever possible, use numbers to quantify your success. So for example, if you developed an app that saved the company money, state how much money it saved. If you helped streamline a process, use percentages to show how much more efficient the process has become after you helped make it better. As a recruiter, I especially appreciate this kind of data. Also, the power of keywords. We've already talked about this a little bit, but it's such an important thing to understand when you're drafting a resume. So you really should tailor every resume to fit the job that you're applying for. One way to do this is to include keywords from the actual job posting that you're applying to. For example, if the job listing includes, a number of required skills, include those skill words that they use in the actual job description in your resume, but only include them if you actually have those skills. This will help the recruiter and the hiring manager easily see that you're qualified for the job. Also, as earlier stated by Nicole, a lot of companies like to use AI applicant tracking systems to screen applicants. So those keywords are going to either help you get moved on to the next round or you'll be passed over. Next slide, please. You also want to make sure you're removing personal interests. So employers really don't care if you're passionate about hiking, as I am, you love music, or you play tennis. You can put all of that great stuff that highlights your personality and certain things that you like to do on the weekends, which will eventually help employers make sure that you fit within the company culture of the organization. But as far as a resume goes, there's no point in putting it because there's only a limited amount of space that you can really highlight the skills that you have. So focus that on your resume, and you can put skills and interests in your actual cover letter. Now, you also want to emphasize your skills. So although you want to remove unrelated interests, you do need to include tech skills on your resume. Personally, I love it when I see a resume that breaks it down even further. So instead of just a skills section, it'll be like tech skills, and it will have programming languages, and then a list, security tools, and then a list, something like that. But that being said, there's no need to include the basic tech skills that most people should have in the 21st century, including Microsoft Office. Please don't include that. You also want to make sure that you're avoiding confusing technical language. So there's no need for fluff. While you have to use technical language in your resume, for example, if you list your technical skills, avoid using too much jargon, especially acronyms and terms that some people aren't familiar with. Avoid technical language that was specific to your old company. Instead, stick to industry terms that everyone in IT is familiar with. Next slide. All right, and lastly, you want to make sure that you're proofreading your resume. Just because you're in IT doesn't mean you can have spelling or grammar errors on your resume. Make sure you thoroughly proofread your resume before submitting it. Ask a friend, ask a colleague to read through your resume as well, looking for errors as well as inconsistencies in your formatting. All right, well, that's all for me. Does anybody have any questions for me? If not, we can jump right along to Andrea.
I see a question. Do you hear any feedback coming from me?
Sorry?
Do you hear any weird feedback coming from me?
No.
Okay, great. It says, how does the tracking system really work? Can it be hacked so that resumes can get to tier 2?
So my company doesn't use that kind of applicant tracking system, so I'm not sure exactly how it works. I know that essentially there are keywords that the computer will be told to recognize within each job that a person's applying to, and will highlight how many keywords that resume has for that job search. But other than that, I'm not sure if there's a way to like hack it.
This is Andrea. I work with a lot of applicant tracking systems. Obviously, anything connected to the internet can be hacked. That's why we have so much cybersecurity work right now. Typically, applicant tracking systems, you can't hack in to move a resume on your own. Most of them have security controls that only allow certain users certain access to do certain actions. Hopefully that helps answer the question.
Cool. If there's nothing else, we will have time for more questions later. But Andrea, do you want to go ahead and take us through formatting, the do's and don'ts?
Absolutely. Thank you so much, Margot. And first off, I want to thank everyone for being here today. It is a beautiful day out here in Southern California, and if our beaches were open, we would have a lot of other opportunities. So thank you for taking time out to be in your safer at home environment and here with us today. My name is Andrea Russell. I started my recruitment career in the startup industry as a senior technology recruiter and HR manager. I then joined a management consulting firm where I supported recruitment efforts for security technology, IT strategy and transformation, HR strategy and transformation. I spent a couple years on a global talent acquisition team, and I most recently was a cybersecurity, identity, and access management recruiter with Deloitte. So we heard some great information today. Owen, Nicole, and Margot have given us so much great information of what should be on a resume. Now we need to decide how to format that resume so you can make the best first impression and land that initial conversation with either the recruiter or the hiring manager. So we're going to talk about resume formats. And I know I saw a question about if I will be presenting those formats. I'm going to present them verbally. Google has tons of free templates available if you go out and Google resume formats. So back to our resume formats. We have three main resume formats. We have a chronological, a functional, and a combination. So first, I'm going to cover the chronological resume format. The purpose of a chronological resume format is to really show your most recent experience and how your skills and experience meets the needs of the hiring team. It's also a great way to show upward progression within your career. So maybe you started out as a junior software engineer, then you became a software engineer, then you became a senior software engineer. A chronological resume is a great way to highlight that throughout your career progression. So the chronological resume is really great for people who have stayed in the same industry their whole career, who have little job hopping or few job changes. And it's really a great way, again, for those hiring managers to see how you've progressed your career throughout your journey. It's also a really good format for individuals that are just starting out in their career and for individuals in mid-level of their career journey. Our next format is functional. The purpose of a functional resume format is that it helps you target the job you're going after and it helps you make sure you highlight your skills and abilities that relate to that specific position or role. So the functional resume is really great for people who have started and stopped careers. We see this a lot with people who have taken time away to take care of a family member, who have raised children, who have gone back to school. So it's really great to show those stop and starts. It's also really good for people that maybe want to make a career change or target a different position, and you need to highlight specific skills and abilities that directly relate to that role. So the functional resume does have actual good information that it can help you present to a hiring manager or a recruiter. Our third resume format is called combination. So this is a combination of the functional resume. So it takes your relevant skills, qualifications, specifically targeted information, and it combines it with your chronological resume. A combination resume is really great for individuals who become architects. So maybe they started as a software engineer, they know they don't want to go into management, they really want to stay on the architectural or SME trajectory. And so this is a great way for those types of individuals to show their career accomplishments. It's also really useful if you're looking to make a career change. And I know I saw a couple questions in the chat box about how to reflect that. The functional format or the combination format allows you to take that functional skill, list it as an accomplishment, and then you don't have to pinpoint exactly what position it was. So in a combination format, how mine is specifically formatted, I actually use this format because I am a master within my field. I don't have an interest to move into management at this time. So I list all my recruitment accomplishments underneath my objective statement and my skills. Underneath my accomplishments is where I list my work history and any job changes. So when an individual reads my resume, they see my accomplishments before they see where I've worked and who I've worked for and what my title was. So this combination resume to me is really helpful. I read a lot of them. I do work in technology. I actually interview and screen and evaluate a lot of architects and SMEs. This is a great resume for that career path. I do have some formatting tips. I know we've heard a couple of these throughout our presentation, but I do want to cover it again just to help everybody write that great resume to help you land that initial conversation. So one thing you want to do is after you figure out what you want to present on your resume is figure out what resume format you should be using. Should it be chronological? Should it be a combination? And you may have multiple resumes for multiple different situations. You may have a chronological resume that you use for specific positions. You may have a functional combination that you use for other positions. So it's really evaluating the information you want to share and how can you share that in the most concise way so you can land that initial conversation. You want to keep your format simple. And this really goes back to how applicant tracking systems are starting to use AI to evaluate resumes to help recruiters keep up with the flow of resumes that do come in. So you want to watch your spacing. White space is very important on a resume. It gives the reader's eyes a break. If there's too many words, too many graphics, too much bolding, too much underlining, it becomes very arduous for a recruiter's eyes to actually scan and read. And as a recruiter who reads hundreds of resumes a week, I would personally skip something like that. And I have because it hurts my eyes. So you want to make sure you have that spacing for the reader's eyes. You also want to be aware of your font size. Do not send a resume with a font size of 9. That is very, very hard for most individuals to read on a laptop or on a desktop. You also want to be aware of your margins. As Owen shared earlier, someone may be printing out your resume and handing it to a hiring manager. You want to make sure that when that resume prints, it looks exceptionally professional. You also want to be cautious of the font style that you use. Most of the individuals on this call were not applying to creative jobs or multi-marketing type jobs. So you want to make sure you use font styles that are very crisp and very clean. I always suggest avoiding Comic Sans. You're not a child, you're not applying to a creative position. Use Arial times I can't remember what it is. I don't use it. It's time Roman numeral, I think. I actually use Calibrini because I think it's very crisp and clean. You want to keep your resume just simple and legible. Remember, recruiters and hiring managers are reading these in 30 seconds or less. You want to keep it very professional. I have been seeing a lot of one-page resumes with graphics. One thing about graphics is AI cannot pick them up in the applicant tracking systems. So even if you are qualified and you have all these great experiences, if you have graphics on there that aren't necessarily usable, you will get yourself rejected out of the process. You also want to proofread it for typos and punctuation errors. I actually had one earlier. Thank goodness for Owen. He caught it, and I just saw another one that I missed. Always have someone double check your punctuation errors. If you're going to put a period at the end of each accomplishment or each job responsibility, do that consistently throughout the entire resume. If you're going to underline your title, make sure you underline your title each time throughout your resume. We also want to focus on what you did. What were your accomplishments, not your daily tasks or your job description. So you really want to include 3 to 5 bullet points of something that will grab the reader's attention. I do use bold in this section for my own resume. When I tell, on my resume, it shows that I made an 11% improvement on payroll errors through some work that I was doing. I actually have that bolded. So just the saved 11% is what readers are going to really focus on. It's going to force them to read the rest of that sentence. So you really want to make sure you're not just reiterating your job description. As recruiters and hiring managers, we know what software engineers do. We want to know what you accomplished. How did you do your job that set you apart from everybody else on your team? And the last thing is you want to be honest. If you've used Java and Python, but the role says they want someone who knows C++, don't put C++ on your resume unless you have truly used it. You could just wrap that up in how you understand object-oriented development concepts. Do you really want to be honest? Once you get past a recruiter and move on to a technical interview, if you have not been honest, it's going to get caught throughout the interview process. Not only will it get caught in the interview process, if you do make it through the process, eventually your employer is going to figure out that you weren't honest on your resume, and that could lead to some other situations. I do want to share with everyone, I am actually done. We'll be opening it up for questions in just a moment, but I do want to share that we included a resources page. You are welcome to reach out to any of the 4 of us. We've all included our LinkedIn, our emails, and ways to get in contact with us. So you are always welcome to help reach out, get more information, and I will go ahead and open it up for questions.
So I can read out some of the questions. So I have here, is there a threshold of keywords to move on, to put on your resume for the bots specifically?
I'm sorry, can you please repeat that? I may have been able to answer it and I wasn't. I was responding to someone.
Oh, sure. So is there a threshold of keywords that we could put on our resumes for the bots?
I can speak to some applicant tracking systems, and I know Margot, I think, touched on this just briefly, is there is a way to add skills to the bottom of your resume. A lot of people just call it technology skills. Some break it out into hardware, software, languages, other tools that they've used. But if your resume will allow it, you can include a technology section that lists the technologies that you're familiar with. Yes.
Should you include a picture on your resume?
No, not in the US. You should not include your picture on a resume. That is common, however, in other countries, but not in the US.
What about tables in a resume? Even if it has no borders, can a bot move through it?
That's a great question. I don't know how well AI is actually reading resumes. I do have something similar on my resume. I have, I think, 3 skills across and 3 skills down without the borders. I'm not really sure. I don't know how AI is moving through some of that information right now. AI is pretty new and people are just now exploring and experimenting how to use UI for resume review.
So it may be that it's just checking for contents. So basically, if the words are present, that may be there. Alternatively, they could be using like optical character recognition, so OCR, in which case it would be very similar. So basically looking at it to read the characters out and see if the words were present. So I would be surprised if tables would cause a lot of trouble. The biggest concern that I would have for it is just readability. It's great for skills sections, but you want to make sure that you don't have it in line with like a long block of text that you expect people to read. Because if I read off, a bullet point, and then at the end of that bullet point, I've got another table row or something to read, my attention is just kind of going to bleed into that. So just a little bit of visual design help there.
Yeah, just to piggyback off of what you were saying, Owen, I hate resumes that are completely table built, including education all the way down to experience. I think that at least my experience with the applicant tracking system, it is just looking for content, so specific words. So you can use a table for your skills, tech skills section, but that's the extent that I would use a table for your resume.
One way to make sure that things will work is if you're using like Microsoft Word or Google Docs, do a Control F or a Command F or whatever. Try to find the word that's in there, and if you're able to search for it using that, your word processor, odds are they'll probably be able to find it through some other means. And that also applies to if you export your resume as a PDF, which is a habit that I'm in. Just make sure that you can, find words on your resume.
And just piggybacking on that, Owen, someone did ask, should you use a PDF or a Word format? I always suggest PDF because it locks your resume so a recruiter doesn't accidentally make changes. So I recommend PDF.
Yep.
We have a question. Someone is in UX and UI. So for more creative fields, would you use graphics in a resume?
I would limit, I know Medell, you actually asked that question. I would limit the amount of graphics you use. You may want to instead include links that show your work.
Yeah, and as someone who's been in graphic design and user experience, I think there's so many other ways you can show your creativity. For example, we said fonts. So even if you don't pick a very expressive font, you can show your design skills with hierarchy, with position, with other graphic design elements. It doesn't have to be images.
So we've got another question here from Lori Polanski. How many years should you include on a resume if you transition job areas, such as a move from IT to security?
I can take this one. So I like to see at least 7 years of experience, and then below that, you can say that you have additional experience and that you're happy to send it upon request. But I think 7 to 10 years is probably enough. Any more than that, it just gets excessive.
Yeah, I've actually removed some of my early internships from my resume because, frankly, my experience from actually 10 years ago is no longer relevant on my resume. And then we have one from Madhuri Gavia. They're asking, is it good to put objective in your resume? And what to highlight in your objective?
I personally don't like objectives because by looking at your resume, I should be able to understand, what your skill set is and what you're applying for. So it's not necessary. A lot of people do still include it, but as a personal preference, I'm not a big fan of objectives.
And I can piggyback on that. I actually think instead of an objective, maybe your 30-second elevator speech. Just a quick introduction of who you are. And I do see that a lot on executive level resumes. They do include some sort of 30-second elevator speech. It gives a great introduction as to who you are.
Yep, and as far as objective, often if I'm applying for a role, I have my job title listed on my resume. So if I'm applying for a software engineering job, I have software engineer on my title. If I'm applying for a manager position, even if most of my job titles are software engineer, I'm going to be listing my title there as software engineering manager or something along those lines. We've got another one from Mato Wheel asking about what's a good font size for a resume.
That really depends on the font type that you're going to be using. So Times Roman numeral, whatever the one is that I can never remember. I know if you use 12 in that one, it's really, really big and too much, and it'll take up too much space. However, if you use Arial, I think Arial 11 is a pretty standard format for most. So you really just have to look at it and try to read it from the reader's perspective. So obviously 9 is always going to be too small. But when you get into 10, 11, and 12, it does really depend on the font type. So you just kind of have to export it out to PDF, see how it looks, and see how it reads.
If it's difficult to read at an arm's reach, you probably want to put your font size or font face up a little bit more. So one thing that I recently did on my resume was I had a little bit more content that I wanted to put on, and I didn't really feel that it was a good idea for me to take anything off. So I have played around a little bit with the font size, dropping it from, say, 12 to 11. And the 1-inch margins aren't a hard and fast rule. Just make sure you're consistent with your margins, because again, that's an attention to detail that when it prints, you might not notice it when you're looking at it in a word processor, but when you print it off, if your margins are all shifted off to the side, that's going to be something that stands out like a red thumb.
And I see the next question of 2-columned resumes versus 1-column resumes. Again, if you're not applying for a graphic or creative type position, I would have a very standard resume. A lot of hiring managers, even though we think they look great and they show a lot about our personality, hiring managers aren't interested. They're busy. They don't have a lot of time. They want to see the information very concise, very crisp, and very straightforward.
And we've got another one from Frederick Walker Jr. How do you put educational online training like Cyberry on your resume? So that's a great question, especially for career switchers, because if you're switching from another career, my good friend Cindy, who I think is in this chat right now, she's switching careers, and she was just recently hired at NASA, and she has a bachelor's degree. But the bachelor's degree that she has is not in a field that is relevant to technology for the most part. So that's something where if you have additional educational online training like certifications or other education, listing it is definitely relevant. But if you have a bachelor's degree, that can be a barrier for a lot of different roles. So making sure that you have it clearly spelled out that you have a bachelor's degree will let you in through a gate, even if that bachelor's degree doesn't seem relevant.
Yes, we have a question from Tracy. Lori, should the industry groups you belong to be included in your resume, such as ISC2 or ISACA? I always put those things. So even with the Long Beach Women in Tech, under experience, I have founder, and then I have all the groups. And then in another section, I have professional groups and the role I play in them, and then the group name. So I would probably only put those groups if I hold a position. What do you think, lady?
I agree. I think that as long as it's relevant, I actually like to see different, groups or, organizations that you're a part of that is relevant to the job that you're applying for. It shows that, you can hold a leadership responsibility or some part within those groups and that you're active in the community. So I definitely would include those. I would do it at the bottom. And kind of near your education, certifications, and then maybe professional, like organizations that you're a part of.
Do you see any common mistakes that career changers are putting on their resumes?
For me, even if you are a career changer, explain what the gap is, because you're going to get asked that question anyway. If they do, want to speak with you and learn a little bit more, it's so important and it saves us so much time. Like, oh, you took a 10-year gap to raise children, or, and then under that you can include some volunteer work that you've done before. Again, relevant, but I think it just really helps the hiring manager, recruiters really understand why you took a break, whether it's childcare, you're transitioning to a new field, etc.
One thing that I saw that I've always been impressed with is this woman who went through our program. She had to take a break because she had breast cancer. So under her experience, she put survivor, and she puts kind of like how she overcame this illness. And so that kind of explained the gap and kind of told her a little bit more about your story. So
I love that. Definitely include something like that. We're all human.
Yeah, maybe a super mom for 10 years.
Yes.
And if there's like a company that doesn't really value that experience, maybe you should find a company that values that experience.
Yeah, you don't want to work for that organization.
I think those are all the questions that I'm seeing. Regarding the training. Yeah, and we are going to put this video on both the WiCyS YouTube channel and the Long Beach Women in Tech channel. And we will also email the slides to all the participants. Owen, can we put up the slides so that we give some time for people to write down our contact information if they like? Owen? Did we lose Owen? Okay.
Yeah, I think we lost him. Can you put it up, Nicole?
Well, thank you everyone for joining us today. We hope that this brought a little bit of value to you and will be helpful when you're creating a resume. I think I speak for all of us who are presenting that if you have any other questions or concerns or just want to have a little happy hour over this quarantine time, feel free to reach out to us. We're all in this together. And thank you again so much for joining us today.